Modern survival advice is obsessed with positioning, high ground, bug-out locations, defensible terrain, perfect campsites. There's this idea that if you just put yourself in the right place, survival sort of takes care of itself. But honestly, history does not support this belief. For most of human conflict and hardship, positioning mattered far less than what you carried and what you actually knew how to do with it. Terrain could help, sure, but it never saved anyone who lacked the right equipment or the skills to adapt when conditions changed. If positioning were the deciding factor, well, history would be full of survivors who simply stayed put. Instead, it's full of people who survived because they could move, improvise, repair, and endure, regardless of where they ended up. For most of history, fixed positions were honestly liabilities. Fortresses fell, trenches flooded, defensive lines collapsed. Weather ignored strategy. Enemy behavior never matched the map. Soldiers who relied on holding ground often died where they stood. Look at cold weather warfare. Armies that tried to, dig in without proper clothing, heating methods, and winter skills suffered catastrophic losses even when they held favorable terrain. The ground did not keep them warm. The position did not stop frostbite. Equipment and skills did. During World War II, units that attempted to hold exposed ridgelines without proper insulation or movement protocols suffered more casualties from exposure than enemy fire. Meanwhile, units forced to retreat across worse terrain often survived at higher rates because they understood pacing, layering, shelter construction, and equipment maintenance. Positioning failed. Capability endured. Equipment mattered because it traveled with you when plans failed. A soldier might lose a position in minutes, but he kept his boots, his clothing, his tools, and his weapon. If those failed, survival ended quickly. Historical records repeatedly show soldiers abandoning strong positions because their equipment could not support the environment. In winter campaigns, troops left defensible ground simply to survive the night. In deserts, armies moved away from tactically sound terrain because water access and heat management mattered more. This is why historical militaries obsessed over boots, coats, stoves, and load-bearing gear far more than modern audiences realize. They understood that terrain is temporary, but equipment failure is permanent. Equipment alone was never enough. The same gear saved one man and killed another, depending on how it was used. Cold weather history is really unforgiving on this point. Soldiers wearing excellent winter clothing still died because, they didn't know how to vent heat, manage sweat, or dry their layers. Men froze in sleeping bags because they sealed themselves in without ventilation. Others survived in inferior gear because they understood movement, pacing, and heat regulation. Navigation provides another example. Terrain advantage disappears when visibility collapses. Snow, fog, darkness, and dust storms erase positional awareness. Soldiers who relied on landmarks or fixed routes became lost. Those who understood dead reckoning, pacing, and terrain reading survived movement even when maps and compasses failed. Positioning assumed stability, skills assumed chaos. For most of history, survival depended on the ability to leave bad positions quickly. Mobility saved lives far more often than fortification. Retreating soldiers in winter campaigns often survived better than those who were advancing, mainly because movement generated heat and allowed them to adapt to changing conditions. Nomadic groups historically survived harsher climates than settled populations, since they could move away from scarcity and danger, rather than having to defend fixed locations. Even in sieges, survival really depended on internal skills and equipment, not just on the strength of the walls. Food preservation, sanitation, fire control, and repair were what actually determined whether a position held or not. When those failed, the strongest walls meant nothing. Modern survival advice often romanticizes the perfect spot, but history shows there is no such thing. Positioning matters most when systems work, when logistics are intact, when communication is reliable, and when resupply is guaranteed. For most of history, those conditions were rare. Survivors could not assume reinforcements, weather forecasts, medical evacuation, or rescue. They assumed loss. They assumed disruption. They assumed they would be forced to move. That assumption shaped priorities. People invested in tools they could carry, skills they could apply anywhere, and methods that worked regardless of terrain. They did not plan to win the ground. Instead, they planned to outlast the situation. Modern advice, often flips the historical priority. It emphasizes choosing the right place instead of, becoming capable in any place. It encourages static thinking in a dynamic reality. History teaches the opposite lesson. You may start in a good position, but you will not stay there. Floods rise, front lines shift, fire spreads, enemies flank, and weather turns. When that happens, survival, it belongs to the equipped and the skilled, not the well-positioned. This is why historical survivors practiced redundancy of skill, not redundancy of gear. They learned multiple ways to make fire, navigate, repair, and shelter themselves. They trained their bodies to endure discomfort. They accepted movement as inevitable. For most of history, survival was portable. It lived in hands, habits, and carried tools. Positioning was temporary, but skills were permanent. Terrain could help, but it never replaced competence. High ground meant nothing to a freezing soldier. Cover meant nothing to a starving one. Shelter meant nothing without the knowledge to use it properly. History doesn't romanticize positions. It respects people who adapted when positions failed. If modern survival advice feels obsessed with finding the perfect place, it's worth remembering that most historical survivors didn't choose where they fought, fled, or endured. They survived because they were prepared to function anywhere. If this perspective changed how you think about survival, battlefield history, or cold weather endurance, subscribe to the channel, share this with someone who still believes position is everything, and keep digging into the lessons history left behind.